This is lesson 2.1. Today's lesson is going to involve a little bit of review from grade 10, and you're going to see some new stuff in here as well. And it's all about factoring trinomials. Remember that the prefix tri means 3, and the word nomials means terms. So you literally have an expression with 3 terms, and that's what this guy is. All this fancy math language, A, B, C, and then this kind of pitchfork looking symbol, this really just means that A, B, and C are any real numbers that you want them to be, okay? And they're the coefficients in front of all the terms. So remember in grade 10, we factored what are called simple trinomials. So that's where the leading coefficient is 1. And for those of you who like steps, I have steps here, but I think this concept is best illustrated by just jumping into a couple examples here. So let's go right ahead and do these. I need two numbers, P and Q, that multiply to the back coefficient. So that's going to be multiplying to 6 and adding up to -1. Okay, so think about the factors of 6 or -6, and they have to add up to -1. So I'm going to choose 2 and 3 because I can make 1 out of those when I add or subtract them together. And because we're multiplying to -6, one of these is going to have to be a negative number. So I could make the 2 negative, but then I have 3 minus 2, which is +1, so that's not going to work. I'm going to make the 3 negative. So 2 minus 3 is -1, and this is the ordered pair that I'm looking for. So once you have that ordered pair, you're going to open up a pair of brackets here, and it's going to be x plus 2 and x minus 3, and that's it. Just like that, according to the numbers that you found. So let's try the next example. I need two numbers that multiply to 24 and add up to -14. Okay, so two numbers that multiply to 24, they're either going to be both positive or both negative because we're multiplying to a positive number. And the numbers are going to be 12 and 2. But if I add these together, I'm going to get +14. So I'm going to make them both negative. And that's going to give me -14 when I add them up together. So once you have those two numbers, open up a pair of brackets. And it's going to be x minus 12 and x minus 2. And that's it. Why don't you pause the video and try this one out yourself and come back and see how you did. All right, welcome back. So the answer that I get is x plus 18 and x minus 2. The two numbers were 18 and -2, and that multiply to -36 and add up to 16. So hopefully you got that one. If not, you might need to make a couple corrections. All right, so now let's get into something that maybe some of you saw in grade 10, but I'm going to assume that not all of you have seen it. So we're going to kind of start from scratch. Factoring complex trinomials. So this is where the leading coefficient is not a 1. And there's a few more steps involved here for those of you who like following step by step. But again, I'm going to jump into some specific examples just to show you how this kind of works here. Okay, so very similar to simple trinomials, I still need to find two numbers that multiply to something and add to something. But this time, instead of multiplying to the back number, it's going to multiply to the product of the front and the back. So if I take 3 and -5, multiply them together, I get -15. So that's going to be my product. I need two numbers that multiply to -15, and it's still going to add to the middle. Okay, so think about the factors of 15. I'm thinking it's going to be 5 and 3, some combination of 5 and 3 with pluses and minuses. And one of them is going to have to be negative because they're multiplying to a negative. And if I want to get to -2, then I'm going to have to make the 5 negative. Okay, so 3 minus 5, or -5 plus 3, that makes -2. So these are the two numbers that I want. Okay, so now I'm going to take these two numbers and I'm going to use them to what we call decompose, or you can think about it as breaking apart the middle term. Okay, so I have a -2x as a middle term. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the 3x squared the same. But instead of writing negative 2x, I'm going to break it up into 3x minus 5x. And I'm going to write it in this order. I'm going to go plus 3x minus 5x. And then I still have a minus 5 at the very end. Now, you might be asking yourself at this point, okay, well, why did you do 3x minus 5x instead of minus 5x plus 3x? Okay, I'm going to explain that in a second, but I'm just going to continue following these steps here. Currently, we're on step number 3, and you'll see why I put it in this order. Okay, so I'm going to group the first 2 terms and the second 2 terms together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out the GCF, the greatest common factor out of the first set and the second set. So I'll show you what I mean. If I'm looking at the first set of terms, the GCF is going to be 3x, right? The biggest coefficient that I can divide out is a 3. The biggest variable that I can divide out, or at least the biggest power, is x to the 1. So I have a 3x, and what's left over, when I divide out a 3x, out of this term, I'm just left with an x. And out of this term, 3x divided by 3x is just positive 1. Okay. Next, I'm going to take the GCF out of the second pair. So if I take a look, I have a negative 5 and a negative 5 in common, so I'm going to factor that out. And what I'm going to be left with, negative 5x divided by negative 5. I have 2 negatives. They make a positive, and I'm left with an x. Same thing here. A negative divided by negative is a positive. In fact, a number divided by itself is always positive 1. Okay, so we're almost there. Now, if you'll notice, I have a common factor of x plus 1. Okay, so this is what's called factoring by grouping. There's 2 different groups here, and they each share a common factor. So I'm going to factor out this x plus 1 out of each term. And what I'm left with, well, in the first term, I'm left with just a 3x. And in the second term, I've color-coded this nicely so that you can see what we're extracting from each term. I'm left with a negative 5. Okay, and that's it. We have our factored form now. So going back to the 3x minus 5x as opposed to negative 5x plus 3x. Now the reason I put them in this order is because the 3 in front of the x squared here and the 3 in front of the x here, that's a common factor. So you want to put them in an order so that the first 2 terms share as much as possible, right? If I were to put a negative 5x here, then the 3 and the 5, they don't have anything in common, so the GCF kind of gets reduced. I want to get the biggest GCF possible. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. Let's try another one. I want green. Okay. Over here. Make it a little bit more even. Okay, let's try the next one here. I need 2 numbers that multiply to, remember we're multiplying the front and the back, so that's going to be a negative 18, and they're going to add up to positive 3. Okay, so what are the factors of negative 18? I could do 9 times 2, but I'm never going to add up to 3 that way. I could do 6 and 3. That could definitely work. So 6 and 3, I think that's going to work. And if I do 1 positive, 1 negative, I need to get to positive 3, so it's going to be 6 minus 3 gives me positive 3. And now I have a choice, right? I have 2x squared, and I could write plus 6x minus 3x or minus 3x plus 6x. And if I'm looking here, the 2 here shares a factor with 6. So I'm going to write the 6x first. Plus 6x minus 3x, and then there's a minus 9. Don't forget about the trailing coefficient. Okay, so now I need to group the first 2 and the last 2 and factor out the GCF out of each one. So the first 2 here, I can factor out a 2 and I can factor out an x. So I should be left over with 2x squared divided by 2x. I'm going to be left with an x plus it's going to be a 3. Okay, And the GCF out of this second term, if I factor out a -3, then I'm left with x, and -9 divided by -3 is a +3. And you'll notice that once I've factored by grouping, I have a common factor of x plus 3 in both terms. So that's what I'm going to take out. I'm going to factor out that x plus 3. And what I'm left with is a 2x minus 3. And that is fully factored. So go ahead and pause the video, try the last one out yourself, and we'll see how you did. All right, so as a final answer, I get n minus 2, 3n minus 2 as the two different factors, so make sure that you can get that. So that does it for this lesson today. Factoring is one of those foundational skills that you cannot ignore. You're going to see it a lot in this unit in Pre-Calc 11. You're going to see it all throughout Pre-Calc 12, and especially AP Calc for those of you who are wanting to get into that. So we need to make sure that we're really strong in this, and we're going to have plenty of practice, so don't you worry. We'll see you next time.